All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for not giving more notice. Didn't I just talk yesterday about how I should be giving more notice? And then I don't. But, that's just where things are at. Where things are at these days. I don't know if I'm going to post a video about this or not. I think I recorded something. I'm not sure. I'm super happy with it. It's been a while since I recorded a video as opposed to streaming, just due to spring and summer, and I had family here and just things that kind of made it difficult. I recorded something right here. Again, I'm not happy about it. I'm not super. I haven't played it back yet. I don't know if I'm super happy with it. I think I kind of ramble on a little bit. I'm want to do that anyway, but still, I try not to do it too much. Hey, Ian. Hey, Brian Smith. Brian Smith posted an awesome, I guess, continuation of his work doing with some hex crawl tools on the forum. So go to forums.hex.press and check that out. Probably on Friday, I'll put on the list of things to look at. It's looking really good. Looking really good. The thing I did the video on, and this is probably was the problem with the video, right? Is that kind of what do you talk about? Excuse me, I got a little bit of the burps from my blood orange tangerine spindrift for the working man. Hey, Magnus. So if you missed this, and I don't blame you, I almost missed it. Kind of wish I did miss it. I think when I talked about yesterday, or what I mentioned yesterday, was that sometimes I'm just not in the mix of things. I just miss it. Things like Shadow Dark are well on their way, and then finally someone goes, "Hey man, did you hear about Shadow Dark?" And suddenly I'm, what? I feel like I'm the groundhog that's just coming out of the hole in the ground. So sometimes I miss things that I wish I would have seen, but then lots of times I also miss stuff that I'm glad I didn't see. And what came up, I guess, earlier this week, did I run into, was it yesterday? It might have been yesterday. I think it was yesterday, last night. I happened to be surfing around Twitter and somebody retweeted something that kind of sent me down this little rabbit hole. There's a YouTuber called The Basic Expert, and I don't follow them. I don't know who they are. Probably a wonderful person. And I know nothing about them, so I'm not trying to say one thing or another about them. And this person, I could look them up and I could see. I want to say, I might have just looked at their channel just to see who the heck they were. I want to say they're larger than me. I mean, not that that's saying much. Let's see who comes up for The Basic Expert. Yeah, so they're slightly larger channel than me. Pretty similar channel. Get a lot more views than I have of late. But then again, when I do a lot of streams and I don't do videos, my views plummet. So there is that. In any case, they what did they do? They interviewed, I guess, this guy Jeffro, who is, I think, the kind of leader of the BroSR movement. Or I don't want to call it a movement. I don't know what the heck it is. Slush Bubs also pretty much missed the Kickstarter for Shadow Dark. And then Ian says it's got me on one screen, Dyson Logos on another, and then work on a third. Wow, you're real multitasking there, Ian. Yeah, so he interviewed Jeffro from the BroSR, and he got some heat from it from someone, and I don't know because I don't follow them either. I more know them on sort of when I've gotten a couple times where we've crossed paths. I mean, I didn't want to cross paths, but got heat from RPG Pundit, who's not somebody who I follow in any way. But as I'm reading through it, I had to think, oh my gosh, I agree with RPG Pundit. What kind of world are we what's going on in this world? I find myself an RPG Pundit, and I'm thinking the same. I'm thinking, yep, I'm agreeing. So the thing here's the deal is, and I made a video about it, which may or may not see the light of day. I don't know. Again, I was rambling a little bit, but I figure I could talk about here informally and then maybe this will lead to me re-recording it in a slightly better way, or whether I decide to just shelve it and let it go or whatnot. So I hate the BroSR thing, and I'm sorry. And I hate it as the BroSR. Okay. I have nothing against, if you want to say there's a group of folks who really feel strongly, or they like to play AD&D rules as written. That's kind of in the gaming part. That's kind of what BroSR is about, is playing AD&D rules as written. But they're very dogmatic in that approach, at least the little bits I've seen. Very much, this is the one true way. These kinds of things that I don't agree with. And I hate the whole BroSR thing. I just, at trying to, I don't know, like we're manly men doing manly things. We don't play OSR, we play BroSR. I hate it. I hate it. You can look it up and go down the rabbit hole on that. But beyond just that part of it, there are anti-Semitic and racist elements that have come out from this person, Jeffro in particular, and from other, I guess, BroSR advocates. And it's not, the thing is that, and you can look and you can see the exchanges between, and I didn't get into the Twitter side of this at all, between, RPG Pundit and the Basic Expert and others. Like, the Basic Experts seems to come in on the like, hey, I just want to talk about games, man. I just want to talk about games. I don't care about other stuff. And I know a lot of folks agree with that. And there are probably some of you in this watching this now, or maybe some folks who will watch this, listen to it later, who was like, damn, Todd, I don't want to talk about racism or anti-Semitism. I just want to talk about elf games, right? That's what I've seen a lot lately. Hey, it's just all elf. I want to talk about elf games, right? And that's his angle was like, hey, man, we're just talking about elf games. I'm just talking to him about this gaming stuff, this other stuff. I don't care. I tend to not. I don't tend to want to separate it so much. I mean, up to a point, I think it's fine. And then, I look, if there was someone who was a great mind of the OSR, but they're also a serial killer, do I bring them on, ignoring the fact that they're a serial killer? Like, if Charles Manson loved D&D, would I bring Charles Manson on to talk about D&D, forgetting the fact that he's Charles freaking Manson? I couldn't do that. Other folks think they can. Okay, fine. But this is even a little bit different than that, because we're talking about this person who has pulling those outside ideas. The hey man, elf games is on one side, outside ideas, but he and some of his ilk in this BroSR are pulling them in. So you find quotes from him saying stuff like, well, if you want to play D&D, you really can't do it if you're not a Christian. What? What is that? And so you get this kind of anti-Semitic stuff, racist stuff filtering into they are bringing it in to your elf games. So then, given that it's no longer a sense of, hey, I think the example I used in the video was Judges Guild, right? Bob Bledsaw, I think it's Junior or the third or whoever's the living Bob Bledsaw, has said seems to be a horrible human being from stuff that they've said. And they own the rights to Judges Guild. But Judges Guild, as far as I know, and all the horrible things they said are completely separate. I mean, we can get into the weeds. I don't want to get in the weeds on, oh, well, did some of these things filter over? For this assumption, like, these are separate things, right? Is anti-Semitism over here, Judges Guild over here. But in this case, you have Jeffro's anti-Semitism stuff, or these folks' Semitism over here, and then it's also in the game because they talk about it. They say things like, to do this elf game, to be the best elf game player you can be, you should be Christian, or you need to be Christian. Hey, I think there was one thing I saw, someone took a picture of some tweet that said, hey, Japanese folks, you want to play D&D the right way, convert to Christianity, stuff like that, which is just unnecessary. So he's got all this stuff. And the problem is, and if folks, if you've seen the interview, I haven't watched it. I don't want to watch it because there's nothing about it that interests me, because I'm not into the BroSR. I'm not curious about it. Bro curious? No, I'm not. So I have no reason to watch that interview. But I think the issue was that the Basic Expert didn't really even acknowledge that there was anything like that, right? That it was not acknowledged that there were these things floating around. And when Jeffro is on the stream talking, depending on how you want to read it, talking, whining, complaining, whatever, about folks in the OSR hating on them, it's not even introduced, or it's not even mentioned. Well, could there be a reason why that they don't like you? Could there be a reason why folks in the OSR are giving you shade? And I think that's where I have to feel kind of disappointed in the Basic Expert, knowing nothing about them, is that this stuff you can't just make the separation of, hey man, I just want to talk about elf games over here. Well, they're bringing these things over, so it's part of the elf games. And then you're going to give this person a platform. You're going to let them complain and say, oh, I don't know why these people don't like me. Why are they trying to keep me out of their reindeer games? And it's like, well, hey, Rudolph, maybe you shouldn't be saying that you have to be religious and of a certain religion to play the game. Might be number one. How do you what about that? And I know we're not journalists, but I think we're going to be honest with ourselves. I mean, if I'm that person, if I had someone like that on here to talk about something, and you could say, well, he didn't know. Maybe you don't have to dig that hard into the Bro SR to see this stuff. That's the other thing. This is not like with Mar Barker and Tecamel, where people legitimately didn't know for years and years, and suddenly stuff falls out of the archives, and oh my gosh, all this stuff. He was using pseudonyms, and then we put it together, and oh my gosh. And as a lot of folks did when the Mar Barker stuff came out, we're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know. I feel horrible for having called this person a genius, or having spread the gospel of Mar Barker, not knowing that the guy was a Nazi. This is not that. The stuff, they're not hiding it. It's not stuff that they're trying to do under other names or in other spheres. Again, it's not even separate from their elf games. It's part and parcel of their elf games. You don't have to go far to find it. So the fact that you didn't find it and didn't address it, and don't feel like addressing it after the fact, but then are just going to keep saying, hey man, I just want to talk about games, I find that a little bit disheartening. That's probably the best word, disheartening. And I have nothing against the Basic Expert. Don't know him, but it feels kind of disheartening. And I feel like at a certain point, like, you can't hide behind that. You can hide behind that if they're legit separate, but in this case, there's no separation. And so you continuing to hide behind that, like you're just talking about games. It's like, the stuff's part of the games. They brought it in the game. So does it mean, are you saying therefore that you're okay with this? Are you saying that you agree with this? Just disheartening. And this kind of came up, at least it hit me yesterday. I don't actually know when all this stuff flew apart. So if you see it on, if you see it hop up on your Twitter, that's what's it about. Again, you may see a video. That's pretty much what I say in the video. I may have said it better here. Let me see what the chat's going on, because I appreciate folks hitting the chat with this. Let's see. Okay, so Magnus says they're subbed to Basic Expert, but they haven't watched much of his stuff. Let's see. Okay, that was back from the beginning. Heroes and Homebrew said I've interacted with Basic Expert a bit and likes Atomic Punk game, but he does have some views I'm not a fan of. Smith reacting to Bro SR. The hell? Ian says a lot of folks in those circles rub me the wrong way, to put it lightly. Yeah, that's true too. Magnus says they've never heard of Bro SR. Is this something certain people refer to themselves as, or is this a term others use to describe someone else? No. Magnus, they loud and proud, Bro SR. That is their own name for the movement. They've hashtagged it. No, it is their thing. This isn't some people looking at them and seeing like, these dudes seem like they're too hopped up on testosterone. We're going to call them Bro SR. No, this is their own name, as Heroes and Homebrew says. Yep, it is their own. Terrence just hopped on when I was talking about Charles Manson. Brian Smith says, sharing a hobby kind of goes to the wayside if we don't share respect for our fellow humans, which I agree with. Bullet Catcher says, they don't understand racist stuff being brought into my games. Yes, there are people who are racist. Even people's opinion on isms is subjective to a point. Some of it is disagreement. I hate justifying my existence to play a game. This is what turned me off of Watsy. Kyle Brink saying all white people should leave the hobby. It's okay to disparage white people nowadays. Bullet Catcher, I mean, I don't know about all that. But I feel like if you're telling somebody you should be a certain anything to play, I think that's bad. And, whatever we may think of other things, I don't know anything about Kyle Brink, and I don't know any of that stuff. But I do know that being able to play and enjoy this game has nothing to do with where you were born or what religion you were born under. Folks of all kinds of walks of life and lived all over the world have enjoyed this game, continue to enjoy this game, and there's no supremacy of a certain type in terms of D&D or anything else. And anyone that's going to start saying so, I'm going to have a problem with. Now, like I said, I appreciate folks who say, like, listen, I don't want my politics in my game, or I don't want my insert other belief here in my game, and that's fine. But in the case of the Broasars, they're bringing it into the game. So I don't think you can both argue, hey, man, I don't want to talk about this because it's not in the game, when they're bringing it in the game. Brian Smith says the whole thing is toxic as AF. Yes, pretty much. Ian's having to approve a lot of comments. Thanks, Ian. I forgot that I gave you some mod powers and you're putting them to use. Yeah, I mean, you can look you can look up Brosar, go on a Twitter or some other Twitter alternative, whatever lets you search stuff. You can look them up. You could see it. You could see it. It's like I said, it's not hard to find. I think ultimately, right, the thing is I just think that if you've got these things, I just think you can't, like I said, I just don't think you can hide behind the, hey man, it's not a game if these things are part of the game. Like if you want to say, just to use a really, let's just go to the ends of rationality and beyond. All right, I'm going to talk to Hitler, but I'm just going to talk to him about his art. Okay, nothing else, right? Just his art. His art has nothing to do, right? I want to talk to him about his early work in the Vienna art scene. I mean, obviously, if you could have an interview with that person and only talked about their art, whatever. But like, you want to make that argument if you're an art person that, okay, fine. I don't know that I would buy it, but whatever. But again, like when the art is part of it, when it is part of the art, I have a hard time saying that, well, I'm just going to talk about the art, but the art is also this other thing. Like I'm not to talk about that, but I'm going to talk about these other things, and the other things all have to do with this by their own hand. And yeah, I agree with Heroes and Homebrew. Anyone referring to themselves as bro something, avoid it. Yes, that's probably a good rule of thumb. Bullet Catcher, I don't have a link to it because I don't follow him, but I'm unless he pulled it down, I'm assuming if you look up the Basic Expert on the YouTubes, you will find it. Oh boy, we hit the verisimilitude. Nice, Magnus. No, RPG Pundit actually is not saying you have to be. He was actually, so the thing is, this is what makes it, I guess, spicy, interesting, whatever, is it wasn't Pundit who was saying you have to be Christian. RPG Pundit was pointing out how these guys were anti-Semitic and how he felt like the Basic Expert, by not bringing it up, was either complicit in it or just acting in bad faith. In other words, he let this person come on. So the idea is, so the RPG Pundit, and I don't want to put too many words in his mouth, that you could probably find it on Twitter. His beef was that, hey, look, these people are saying all kinds of anti-Semitic stuff that involves the game. And then you have him on to talk about the game and he gets to sit there and basically give his end of, oh, what a horrible thing it is that I've been blackballed by the OSR. Why don't the OSR people, they're all mad, whatever, and not bring up the fact that, well, here's the reason why this is happening, and essentially kind of let him skate and not bring up the anti-Semitic part of it. So that was that RPG Pundit's angle. He was not saying that you had to be Christian. That was, and I don't read anything. I have not read anything that RPG Pundit does, so I don't know anything about all this stuff. But his point was that the Basic Expert was wrong for not addressing that, which I agree with, which is weird. I agree with that. I totally, and I agree. And it was not something that I expected, not something I expected to find. When I was playing, if I was playing Association Bingo, I did not think that I would have agreeing with RPG Pundit on my card. But there it is. It's just a weird. It's a weird thing, and I don't mean to. Hey, Josh, I don't mean to try to drag everyone in this. It's just something's been on my mind. It's like I made the video on it, and now I'm not sure if I'm going to post it or not. I don't really know if I have anything great to say other than it's just weird that I agree with Pundit on something. But I get the whole we just want to be elf games and nothing else. But when the people are bringing the elves into the elf games, I just think you can't not address it. I guess that's that is that. Blackballed is my word. I don't know. I don't know what word. I haven't watched the interview, so I don't know what word he uses. But what I heard is that he complains or makes note of the fact that that he feels under the attack. I don't know, whatever it is, that he's being persecuted, whatever it is. And I'm looking at. Let's see. I just pulled up his channel. I don't see. Is it there? Did he take it down? I don't think so. Oh shoot! Oh no! There goes soda. Some of my Spindrift onto my table. Thankfully, nothing electronic is in the way, and I happen to have some paper towels, or really, not paper towels so much as napkins. Oh, bad, Todd. Going down rabbit holes. Didn't think I'd be doing today. Oh, maybe it was okay. It was stream. Maybe that's what it was coming. Okay, so it was stream. So if you're looking at our videos in YouTube, you might not find it. You got to go to streams, and it will pop up. It's Natural Ones, I guess, is what the series is called. I mean, I do agree. Heroes and Homebrew says if you make spicy comments in public, then you need to accept the fact that people will call you out on it and vocally disagree with you. Yeah, I mean, there's no way you shouldn't. And I do think that that just do your due diligence. And if you want to have somebody on and you're seeing like, oh my gosh, they've got these spicy takes, don't hide from the spicy takes. And the reason I say like we're not journalists is that we don't go through the training. I think that's the thing that kind of gets messed up in this week. Like, I have interviews with people and I like to do it, and I think I do a pretty good job, but I'm not a journalist. So I know it can be difficult to have this person on here, whatever, and then we're not trained to do things like ask these questions like that. Maybe we should about like, hey man, I just got to cover this thing. Just gotta. This thing is out there, so I just need to mention it, or we need to discuss it. But folks who say that you're, an anti-Semite, and that's why they don't want to hear about Bro SR, like, what do you feel about that? But I feel like you should do something. I don't think you should hide and say like, oh, I did, and especially that what irks me about it's just elf games, man, is like they've made it a part of the elf games. Part of the elf games apparently is you have to be Christian. So I don't think you can then you can't separate it when they've already unseparated it for you. Well, I'm glad folks are able to keep it going in the chat. I'm not able to follow everything. It's just too much stuff zipping up, but good to hear. All right, we've spent, man, almost 30 minutes just on that. Was not my intention. And I really, and like knowing everything I know about BroSR and stuff, I'm not trying to get that thing clicks either, but of course I'm not gonna, it's there, it's kind of in the, I don't know, in the news, seems like. In the news, seems like I felt like I just want to talk about it, but and if you feel the need to go find it and click on it, you can find it, click on it. It's not none of this stuff is hard to find. Magnus says, he hate to be that guy, but it seems like everybody, especially online, has massive persecution complexes, whether it's the woke mob or the fascists. I think that's true. I mean, it's hard. It's social media makes it hard because you not only feel the attacks on you, but it feels like everybody sees them too, even if it's not really everybody, right? It feels like, oh my gosh, this stuff's public. It's out there. And it's hard not to get caught up in it. And I think when you've gotten into these scrapes, and at this point I don't even get into them, I just try to let them wash over me. I can't say that it doesn't affect me, that I don't sit there gritting my teeth about, people are talking and I just want to do something, and then I don't. It's hard, and then you can magnify that by the people who are then. I had that debacle on Twitter a little while back, and I just ignored it and left it alone. But when I just would keep seeing my phone, my notifications, or anything would just keep popping up, or even if I had notifications off and I would see the little number bubble by Twitter saying like, look, I have all these notifications waiting for me, and I just know they're just going to be irritating. Of course, it dies down, which is kind of, it's like, this too shall pass kind of thing. And I think so. RPG Pundits, one of the I don't know, accusations, let's say, he leveled at the Basic Expert was that the Basic Expert didn't want to piss off the BroSR dudes. Like, he's trying to please everybody, to be the I don't know, just to be, you don't want to make any enemies, you don't want to drive off any potential subscribers, followers, whatever. So you're gonna have this person on, that their views are controversial, and that their views are totally cogent to gaming, but you're not going to talk about them, because in talking about them, you don't want to piss off these people whom you're hoping, maybe is the whole reason why you have Jeffro on to begin with, you're hoping will bring notice to your channel. So you're hoping that Jeffro is going to tell his folks, hey man, come check out the Basic Expert. We're going to chat. It's going to be great. Come for the stream, stay for the rest of his content. And then I'm not going to talk about other things. I don't want to piss them off. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't want to impugn any motivations. Brian Smith says, this is all just a big ploy to avoid working on my document. Probably. Yeah, that's true too. So since I've been called to the carpet by Brian Smith, I got to go back to my document. So something I did do is I did write up. So hopefully you were here yesterday when I went through a lot of this, but essentially it's just what I want to do is take wilderness stuff and mechanize it to fit it in with the stuff I worked on last week, so that you could say you're searching for the lost city of Z, and you're thinking to yourself, well, what do I need to roll to do that? And you're in a jungle, and some other things you can look at and say, oh, I'm in a jungle, therefore the difficulty to do something is X. And I kind of have that mechanized already. Great. And so I came up with, first, using an HD, like HD for creatures. This is HD also, but I call it habitat dice just to differentiate it slightly, but still use HD. So in the end, you can have all your different terrain types. And I give these kind of starting values for HD, but they don't have to be, doesn't have to be, that could be whatever you want. They're just for just super quick reference. So if you were doing something out in the desert, I don't have jungle in here separately. I don't know if that would be woods. Depending on which edition, also, you end up with different terrain types. In any case, whatever. Let's just say you decide that it's woods. You could say, okay, so if I needed one success normally, if it were in a vacuum, if it was an empty room or whatever, now we need 2, because we're in the woods. That's 2, right? Clear, which would be your optimal wilderness conditions, would be just one success, a normal task. If you're somewhere else, you need more successes. This is because it's more difficult terrain. You're not just in open, flat, empty ground. You are you're in a dense space, so it's harder to search, so on and so forth. So then we take this habitat dice HD concept and then expand it. So now, just like with HD, you can have two things that are both 2 HD, but they're very different creatures. Well, how do you model those little differences? Yeah, ultimately they're 2 HD, but they can be very different. So what do we do for terrain in that same way? I extend it with some attributes. Obviously, I'm not giving strength and dex and constitution to some woods, but I am giving them these, which I call traps, which stands for turbidity, ruggedness, activity, peril, and scarcity. And these basically are all counters to the things you might be doing. Turbidity is about navigating and essentially scouting, like how hard is it to see? Turbidity it could be many things. Remember, this is mechanical, not fictional. So the fiction could be it's very foggy, and that's why the turbidity is high, meaning that it's hard to get sightings and things because you can't see. Or it could be that you're in a deep jungle, or it could be any number of reasons why you just can't see and scout and do things very well or very efficiently. That's turbidity. Ruggedness is all about moving. How hard is it to move? It could be because of mud or sand or loose gravel or just very uneven terrain. There could be any number of reasons. Whatever they are, that becomes ruggedness. Activity is essentially how dense the population is. So this would be if you wanted to use it instead of whatever your sort of BX standard wandering creature checks, you could use activity instead. Is it mostly empty? Is it very packed in with things? That's going to do that. Peril is basically your general danger level. You can use it in, the idea here is you can use it in many different ways, but it's basically just your general, like, how dangerous is this place? That level of danger. Is it, lethal? Is it, fairly, and you can, again, it's because it's mechanical. In terms of the fiction, this can service in many different ways, but how dangerous is it? And then scarcity, how hard is it to gather resources? When someone's saying, I want to go get wood to build a fire or whatever else, I want to go hunting or fishing, or I want to gather berries, how hard is it to find stuff? That's scarcity. So I came up with those. And then the idea is that we can have two things that are both 2 HD, but through using those individual attributes, you can, some places they could be very different, but they can both be 2 HD. Brian Smith likes the idea of a wilderness stat block. Oh, well, I appreciate it. Apparently, here's a homebrew is drinking bourbon, and Brian Smith wondered if you could dip Oreos in it. That sounds gross, but I don't drink bourbon, so I don't know. Lethality on a scale of Canada to Australia, something like that. Is Australia seen as highly lethal in terms of an environment? I wonder. But it could also be things like one of the things I suggested you could use, say, that peril for is if you had a list of, like, the wandering creature charts for your dungeon, right, or by level, and the lower level you go, so the levels are ascending, right? Level 1 is kind of first level-ish. Level 7 is level 7-ish. You could use peril in the same way. If you had some wandering creature tables that were on that same sort of level, then if you have peril 7, you would draw from that, like, 7th level style encounter area. If you have a peril of 1, you could draw from the first level. But there's, it's really there for you to use. But I wanted it to be something you could eyeball and say, okay, 1, I noted it down, and then 2, I can factor it into different things, so that my cat's over here, different things in different ways. I'll probably make some of these. I'll have to write some of these notes in there, but and then I did do, between yesterday and today, I kind of just went through the steps of what you would do. So if you were to create your wilderness stat block, so to speak, you would take you could start from anything, but really I would just say start from the generic terrain type, then go through the descriptors. If you have a forest and I think, it's foggy and it's in a series of ravines and it's all these things, you kind of put all those different factors, kind of separate them out, and then you turn those factors into adjustments to those those attributes. So if it's in a series of ravines, then ruggedness would go way up. It's foggy, so turbidity would go up. But maybe because it's all in these sort of semi-isolated valleys, then you would say that the activity level is really low, so you might drop that down. Peril, because of the nature of it, maybe say that's up. But then scarcity, maybe is low. So and then you would then at the end refactor it all together, come up with a new habitat dice. At this point, I'm just having your HD basically be the average of those. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be things that don't, but it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be like in the neighborhood, which I think is fine. Let's see. Magnus says that let's all take a moment to appreciate that WotC brought players of all socio-political persuasions together with their OGL antics, and the OSR is probably bigger than ever. That's absolutely true. They did do that. They managed to unite just about everybody against them, or most everybody. So then you end up, once you go through all that, you end up with a stat block of sorts, of which I have an example here called the Howling Wastes. It's a desert. It's aligned, chaos aligned, and then these two descriptors. It's windswept and eerie. I then just kind of made up some numbers for it. It's got 8 habitat dice. Turbidity is 10. Ruggedness is also 10. Activity is 2. Peril is 8. And then scarcity is 10. And then I gave it this little ability. It's fireproof because the constant winds make it impossible to start fires anywhere outside of a shelter. So you can't carry a torch, can't light a fire inside of the Howling Wastes. So this is what you end up with. And so my thoughts are that just like with monsters, you could have this abbreviated view, and then you could also have more detail where you need it. But you could, in terms of if you're running a hex crawl or something like that, you could have like these quick notes. And then, but what I wanted, obviously the goal is that these would be kind of usable, even outside the task system. Like, oh, okay, these tell me some things about it. I got this little kind of special ability. Maybe someone else could have a special ability that affects something, who knows? Who knows indeed? Ian says that rum and Coke was their drink in college before they realized you could buy rum that tasted good. I always liked pina coladas, but I don't drink. I always just drank them. I didn't drink then, and I don't drink now. So it was always virgin pina coladas, but for me. And then I've been thinking about some extra stuff here. One of it was using ruggedness for movement speed. I haven't quite gotten that figured out. Here's the hit dice, or the habitat dice, I should say. If I convert these straight to ruggedness and then go, you end up with some really big numbers. Because originally I had was thinking like maybe we could just do kind of 1-to-1. But I think I'm going to have to just come up with what the ruggedness features are. Because 1-to-1, it just ends up being, if this is 1-to-1 and this is 1-to-2, 1-to-3, and I mean 1 hex per watch. So, you just basically be like 6 miles per 3 hours. So this would be 6 miles for 3 hours, 6 miles per 6 hours, 6 miles per, 9 hours, 6 miles per 12 hours. Like it ends up being like, boy, you barely move in a desert. I did see, and I'm not totally, do I still have the number here? No, I saw somebody, where was it? It was something else. I did read, and I'm not super, I don't care so much about those super uber realism, right? Somebody did it in this time, so therefore what it could be. I just want something that seems about right. 24 miles a day, 12-hour days walking, especially under load. And even like the roads and trails, they're not great, right? They're not wonderful. It's not like walking on a track where it's like, oh, this is nice, and it's got a little spring in it. It's like these things are not great, not concrete. You got wagon ruts, they're muddy, all this kind of stuff. So if they're a little bit less than what somebody under ideal conditions, keeping a small pack or no pack at all and all the stuff, or kind of competition, I don't care. I'm not trying to, it's not about, well, can you do it in a world record speed? So 24 miles in 12 hours or whatever it is, I think is fine. That's actually a little bit more generous than I would do on my own. But it quickly gets really small. Smaller than I think I want. And the other thing, it's hexes, right? I'm talking about hexes, so it's not, you're not necessarily in a straight line, and trails and roads are generally not in straight lines, especially not when you get into when they're in going through woods and wetlands and things where they have to, by nature, try to keep to the high, flat ground, whatever. So, but I think it was just getting the fact that like deserts and barren, if I just use the habitat dye number, it's too much. Like I saw a guy who was going through some desert in California, and he was doing like 220 kilometers in 10 to 12 days, something like that. So you end up at something like, 22 kilometers a day, let's say, which is like, what does that end up being? Something like 12 miles, give or take. I don't know. What's 22 km in miles is what? 13. Yeah. So like 13 to 14, 13 and a half miles a day. Now that is maybe very ideal conditions. I don't care so much about that, but maybe cut it almost in half. He'd be at 6, which would be okay. But then I need to figure out how this scales. How does, because 1 is the best. So I don't know. I got to figure that out. I gotta figure that out. Just to see. Here's what Homebrew says: could the ruggedness not relate directly to the movement rate in whatever system is being used? Yes, I'm trying to be handy. I'm trying to be handy. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you can use it however you want. I was just trying to feel like maybe I shouldn't do it. Maybe I should just skip giving like a BX, essentially a BX style, like here's it. But I thought it might be helpful for folks to have something and not just say go back to the system you're using, because it could be like BX where they don't give you anything. Bryce Smith asks, ruggedness is like difficult terrain at large scale. Yep, that's pretty much it, right? It's difficult terrain on the scale of the whole locale, as opposed to like a 5 foot by 5 foot circle or whatever, like spell kind of thing. And it can obviously, there's a range, right? You go from clear, which would basically be like 1, which is just or grasslands, just flat, and then flat and nice and not particularly rugged, to very, very, very rugged. Canadian military, the standard is 13 kilometers, carrying 35 pounds in 2 hours and 10 minutes. Yeah, I mean, that stuff is nice. And I also looked up like how far did pilgrims walk and all this stuff. And you can get some data. Like I said, I don't care too much about being like bang on a number exactly. I just want it to not feel like, oh my gosh, this is too fast, or oh my gosh, this is too slow. And because remember, just like with, well, how far do we see in a desert, or like what do these things mean? And to me, it's more about the imagination part. And even if the reality is in a desert, you can actually move quite quickly. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I've been to the desert. I've been to the Sahara, pretty much on the edge of the sandy desert, kind of where there's so in Morocco, you kind of go off, and when you're going into the Sahara, at least from one part of it, you end up on sort of the rocky plateau, goes out, and then sand overtakes it. And it's pretty neat because you can see some really massive sand dunes, especially when you see like the first massive sand dune that's on the edge, and it just dwarfs everything. It's just huge. It's rolling up at you. And we went into the desert a little bit. In fact, I steered a camel for a little bit. It's all tourist stuff, and my wife was pregnant with our daughter, so she got into she didn't want to risk she's pretty far along at the time, so she did not want to risk any shenanigans with the camel. So she drove in the Range Rover around to the camp, kind of went around, because like where this area of the dunes was, I mean, the rocky stuff is kind of like right she going like right outside of you is that there's this flat rocky thing, so you could like zip along the rocky flats like there, and then you can and then come around that way. Whereas I went over the desert. Still, it was fun. I don't know how many miles per hour we were taking. I'm not even sure if we went a mile. It was fun. That's my desert experience. But Brian Smith says when you're riding a sandworm, travel for the desert can be quick. Here's what Homo points out. Sure, if you're in Atreides or really a Fremen or an Atreides. Yeah, inside the worm might work just as well. Just maybe not as comfortable a ride. But it is good to kind of look at some numbers just to see about the ballparks. It just seemed like this number is getting pretty low, but it's probably beyond me to try to figure it out right now. And then I was also going to put in a table for using activity, just a quickie conversion for your wandering creature checks. Which I'll need to do a little any dicing. I'll need to do some any dicing on this just because I don't mind, much like with the other numbers. So in this case, we have numbers from BX, if you're using BX, that cover this. At the same time, I don't mind. Oh, I need a third one. Oh, what is it? Wandering. I'll just put that there for now. So I do need 3 of these. I don't mind diverging from BX, let's say, somewhat. But at the same time, if I can stick closer to it, then I would do that. I would like to do that. How did I end up giving him? Let's see. So, and if you're wondering on the way this works, I'm using Markdown. And Markdown, you can make tables in Markdown, but you have to kind of, it converts like this funky text thing into tables. I wish that these kind of editors would let me use it as a table here instead of diverting back to the text when I go into edit it. But, it is what it is. Ian says, if you have, for example, a protection from elements spell, does that change that ruggedness value of a desert or tundra? Protection from elements probably wouldn't change the ruggedness because that's really just how hard it is to move. Though if you had something like, I don't know what kind of spell it would be, like obviously something like levitation would work a trick, something like that. But it would help you from other things. Protection from elements, I imagine, if I would read the spell, is mostly about like saving from temperature and things like that. So like temperature effects. I'm not sure that maybe that would go under I should probably think about that, like where temperature effects would go. They might be separate, but maybe it would be peril. It probably would be, I would probably have it adjust. Actually, what I would probably do is not put it under one of those, but just if you're using things where you're being affected by the elements like extreme cold, which I think would use peril, that if it's something like that, that would say, okay, on those kind of checks, yes. Ian would rule that water walking would work over snow. I don't know. It's really up to you. I don't know. I tend to, I guess some people like that. Like, oh, it's so clever. They thought of using water walking over snow. I don't know. I'm a curmudgeon. I would tend to say, nah, it doesn't, they're not the same. Not the same. But if you want to give them credit for water walking with snow walking, that's cool. I'm not gonna hate on you for it. Freedom of movement. Yeah, Brian Smith, right. Brian Smith mentions freedom of movement. Freedom of movement would reduce the ruggedness, or at least reduce the effect of ruggedness on you. Yeah. So the thing is like you wouldn't apply it to the environment, but you would say like, okay, I need to make, we're moving, and it's like, oh my gosh, this terrain is really hard and tough. It's got this, ruggedness of, I don't know, 6. And you're like, what? I cast freedom of movement. Great. It's down to ruggedness 1, or maybe you even be, what I think the fun thing is having the numbers means you can then play with the numbers. You can play with the numbers. So you might say, okay, it's got a ruggedness of 6. If you want to treat it as grassland, you'd have to reduce it to 1. If you cast for every level, like, depending on what spell slot you cast your freedom of movement, it'll reduce it down. So you could say that, okay, if you use it at first level, it will reduce it down by 2. If you're using it at 4th level, it'll reduce it down by 4. If you're using it at 8th level, it will reduce it down to 0 or whatever, right? So you can, now that you've got numbers that you can easily, so abstract numbers you can attach to it, that you can have fun with spells and things and play with how these different numbers react to each other. Heroes and Homebrew says they would allow water walking to work on a frozen lake without the ice breaking, but not on snow. Yeah, I mean, there's no wrong way to do it. Magnus brings up Rule of Cool. Yeah, I'm probably a little bit afraid sometimes of Rule of Cool. I just don't want it to turn into Rule of Cheap. And sometimes I don't think anybody intends to, but you end up with something that's first time you do it, it's cool. And then it becomes cheap. And I like the cool part. I don't like the cheap part. And so I did a video on this ages ago where I went through and I think I mentioned something like, why not have folks spend, in 5th edition terms, spend inspiration to do a Rule of Cool thing. Like if you have an inspiration, you can spend it and then you can do some kind of Rule of Cool thing. But that Rule of Cool thing only works because of your inspiration. Otherwise it doesn't. And this way you don't get, so like, let's take water walking. I don't know what level water walking is as a spell. Maybe it's a mid-level spell. Maybe it's a low-level spell. So you go, okay, when the first time this person does this in a situation where they're 2nd level, and let's just say it's a 2nd level spell. And they go, oh my gosh, I need to get away from these wolves or wargs or orcs or whatever. And, and you're looking at it, you're like, okay, well, you did deep snowbanks and you don't have snowshoes on. And it looks at this point that, like, even though they're slowed down by the same heavy snow you are, there's no way you can beat them. They're going to catch you as you're trying to plow through the snowbank. And the wizard panics and looks at their stuff and goes, for whatever reason, I have water walking memorized, or I have it on a scroll. I'm going to burn through the scroll water walking. And then you go like, that's a badass idea. You get to do that. All right, I'm going to give it to you. So that's fine. At 2nd level, it's a really big deal, right? It's a big use of a resource, all this stuff. Now you're 6th level and you've got 100 scrolls of water walking, and you've got 8 spells, 2nd level memorized water walk, all this stuff. Suddenly now it's just like, all right, if we're in anything kind of deep water based whatever, I'm just going to water walk our way past it. And I feel like, and I've had players, and I'm not saying everybody does this, but I've definitely, which probably helps with, probably part of what sets my particular tone on this, is I've had players who, and in games I've played, it's been a legit thing where you try to set a precedent and then you try to work that precedent as much as you can. And the example I always bring up is the player I had who was always trying to work floating disc into everything, trying to bleed every last bit they could out of floating disc, but just got to the point where it's like, man, floating disc is now going to replace every spell. Like, why did anybody come up with an 8th level spell that does X when you can just do it with floating disc? So, my answer to the problem when it was starting to show itself to be a problem in the game I was running was I forced the player to basically have to test out all these hypotheses, because he kept asking, well, can I do this? When I can do this? Can I do this? And it was just getting to be too much. Finally, I said to them, it's like, you're going to have to spend downtime. If you want to know if floating disc will cut somebody in half, if you cast floating disc and then run behind this creature, and you have this expectation in your brain that the floating disc is going to try to get to you as fast as possible, and because it's like, it's only 2-dimensional, that's just going to slice through anything in its way, then you could either ask the question, the answer is you don't know. If you're saying like, is it going to do this? The answer is you don't know. If you want to find out and not in the middle of a fight when it matters, either you can find out when you cast a spell, run behind that bugbear and see if the floating disc kills it, or you can spend downtime and resources to experiment in your little laboratory and try to determine it. But you're not getting the answer until then. I'm not giving you a bunch of freebies because I ran out of patience of them always trying to stretch and me always having to explain and, this is what I always felt a sympathy for the way descriptions and things are written out in 5th edition, because sometimes if you don't, you get these players like, well, it doesn't say it can't, or it just says this, therefore It must be razor sharp, and therefore it must, it's like the whole point of like the whole point of floating disc was to basically be like a baggage carrier in a spell. So what sense would it make if it flew at you at 300 miles per hour? Like sending, you whole idea is you put the chest on the floating disc and then you walk to the exit and you're able to get the chest out, because even though you can't carry it, your floating disc can. Not I put the chest on the floating disc and suddenly the floating disc goes 800 miles an hour and flings just from a fictional standpoint, it's like it doesn't make sense. Just like it doesn't make sense for the floating disc to slice through things. It makes more sense for the floating disc to go gently around things so that it doesn't disturb whatever it is that you're carrying. But this person kept trying to push it. So I kept saying, you want to push it? Well, you're going to have to figure out downtime. And you'd get these answers like, no, this is not the point of this spell. The point of the spell was to be like a valet or a baggage handler, not be a weapon. But I'm no longer going to give you those answers for free. You're going to have to pay for them. But I feel like if I had at that point an inspiration system, I might have been a little more lenient if they had to spend inspiration. Because one, they'd have to get that inspiration for doing something. And then two, they only have one, maybe if they spent one early, if they had one and then spend it early in the game, you could say maybe they get a second one and spend it. But the idea is you could only have it happen once, maybe twice in your average session. Probably only once, if that, because they need to have inspiration and all these other things have to line up. There's my little TED talk on rule of cool plus inspiration. Terrence says decapitating disc should be a spell. Yeah. Brian Smith says floating disc is now a member of our party and will be getting XP. Yes, absolutely. And then Ian says if you're high enough level to cast teleport, why care about getting over some snow? That's true, but you never know. Maybe I've just been burned too often, Ian, but you never know. Just that cheapness of it. That's the point is it just becomes cheap. I don't want that stuff to be cheap. Magna says, is this document in any of the forums? Not yet. The document will be coming. Both documents will be coming in this kind of SRD simplified format soon, probably to my itch page. So hang tight, Magnus. They're coming. They are coming. And then the typeset nice version with probably some more examples. And maybe some of the stuff like these appendices probably will be going not in the SRD version. Maybe even these won't go in the SRD version. I'll save them for the zine version, which I'm finishing up. And then you'll have them. And then you'll have them and you'll be able to use them to do with what you will. I did so if you are a patron, you can actually go to Patreon where I did put the preview for the other set for the DAD6 this, or actually it's in this form, but this now the basics is I did post a Patreon. So if you're a patron, you can go grab that. You can grab it now. This will also go to Patreon, and then the SRD stuff when I've let it simmer a little bit and I finished some of the other stuff. These will both go onto itch. Let's see. Brian Smith says, if a tactic is cheap, it cannot be cool. Therefore, it is not covered in the rule of cool. That's true. Ian says they blame Wheel of Time so that casters running around opening portals to cut things in half. Yeah, it can happen. I'm cool. And the thing is I really like coming up with interesting solutions. It's that next day, and maybe I just had bad experiences where it's just like the next week you do something cool, right? You're like, oh my gosh, it's kind of like the bag of holding thing, right? It's like the first time somebody's like, ooh, I did this and I got panicked and I pushed it in the bag of holding, and it's like it opened up a tear in space and time or blew something up, and you're like, oh, that's awesome. And now it just is like bag of holding is like a grenade. You just keep these two bits and put them together, and that to me is not cool anymore. It's not fun. So my response to that is to kind of limit and have it be not just be a curmudgeon and be like, no, it doesn't work anymore or only worked the once. It's just like, no, you got to inspire. It needs inspiration. It works partly because of the things you did, but partly because you were divinely inspired. So in order for it to work again, you must again be divinely inspired, aka having inspiration to spend. So that's kind of I feel like it makes it easy. I think people always complained, at least they used to, maybe they don't anymore, about how inspiration was one of those things that showed up in 5th edition, but that you couldn't use, or not couldn't use, but it was underused. So I felt like this was a nice solution. It's a reason to want to get inspiration. It's something to spend inspiration on, and it gives you some extra control over it. And then as a GM, I'm not going to worry about it too much because I know you're limited to your inspiration. So it kind of, to me, it solves a lot of issues for me anyway that come up. Am I worried about it being all of a sudden being something they're going to do like over and over again? No, I'm not, because they can only do it. They can only do it the one that time they have inspiration. You know, am I worried about whatever? No, they'd have inspiration. Inspiration just means it's going to have a cap. You can't, you know, especially if you have rules like you're going to start every session with no inspiration, and that you can't carry inspiration from session to session, and that you can only have one at a time. It's like this perfect meta currency for all this stuff that you want to keep as being special. People are getting into Wheel of Time. Magnus says the Aes Sedai are the epitome of mage class power creep. Magnus says you've got dudes or ladies with swords, and then Rand and co basically rewriting reality as time goes on, or wheels on, but a bump. Brian Smith says, I like to one-up them. You put your bags of holding together again. Well, it's not an exact science. It's magic. Oops, a small fly got caught in between. Now you've got a mutant fly to deal with. I like that. And then Heroes and Homebrew wonders if this is Jeff Goldblum. Could be. Could be. Well, I can't say I got a lot done, but I appreciated you guys listening to me talk through that the Bro SR versus OSR shenanigans. I'm probably, you know, I don't know if I'm going to post a video or not. It's a bummer. It's a bummer when the things come up, and it's also a bummer, just frankly, when you see people, and I don't know the guys, so I'm not, I guess I probably shouldn't have an expectation. We just would maybe prefer that it was handled one way and it was handled another one. It's always weird to end up going like, boy, me and Pundit, RPG Pundit actually agree on something, which is kind of blew my mind, but I appreciate you guys listening to me talk that out. And then we got to go through this a little bit. What do I have left to do? I think I do want to maybe give an example. Maybe the one that's easier to me is the wandering creature, because it could basically just be the number of dice that you roll, which is easy enough to handle. I'll probably just need to double check in any dice that the what I'm doing fits up pretty well. Any dice, by the way, if you're working on mechanics, it's a great free resource. You can kind of program it a little bit, so you can try to, it could be a little, I'm not great at the programming element, but I have a couple of functions that I managed to cobble together where I can do things like roll these D6 dice pools and get the odds of like sixes. Since everything I'm doing is sixes, I don't care about other numbers. I just want sixes. I was able to come up with a couple of functions that I can put into any dice that basically allow me to say, count the sixes. If you're rolling the 6 dice, what are the odds of getting different numbers of sixes? And then what I can easily do is then compare that to something like BX, where it is changing up. And so I can kind of see, again, like I'm not interested. I don't care. They're not exactly the same. I just want to get them like, okay, because I feel like that was the BX is kind of a good baseline and an easy one to use that kind of want to, am I close? All right, that's good enough, kind of thing. Brian Smith says it was an insane and fun chat. Well, I'm glad I was able to come through with something fun. Probably want to hold the insane for the most part. Here's an Homer says, I feel like there's 2 different OSRs, one with a bunch of drama and people yelling at each other, and the cool one. Well, hopefully I'm mostly in the cool one. And I'm really, when it came up, I think it might have been friend of the channel, Krister, who pointed out or who asked like what NSR meant, like new school revival or whatever new school revolution, whatever it is, like what's the difference between NSR and OSR? And there were some great responses. If you go to the Lemmy community group, just go to lemm.ee and search for OSR. It'll come up, and you can also, it's federated. So if you're on other Lemmy instances or KBin or even on Mastodon, you can find it. but Krister asked, what the difference, because I put them both in the title of the community. It's the OSR/NSR community. And he asked what the difference was, and people point out some great responses. But I feel like one of the reasons is that people just didn't want the nonsense that's a lot of the stuff that's surrounding OSR anymore. Because whether we like it or not, a lot of people see this stuff, whether it's BroSR, whether it's something else, and they just end up saying like this OSR stuff is full of, they get too exposed to the, as Heroes of Homer says, the not cool part of the OSR, and then it's like, well, this is hot nonsense. We don't want anything to do with. And part of the NSR thing was, I think, really was just like, we just want to get away from that, which I can't blame them, because a lot of times I want to get away from it. I want to get away from it too. But what can you do? What can you do? We got we got to do with the decks that we are dealt, the hands that we are dealt, not the decks. All right, folks. Oh, Men SR. Yeah. But see, but that one, Brian Smith, that one makes too much sense, because you have Frank Menser. Yeah, it's or what about OS Sir? Too many different versions. It's just yeah. I don't know. I don't know what's the matter with people. All right. Well, folks, I can't say I got a lot done, but I always enjoy being able to, in this case, get some stuff off my chest, talk some things out, refocus. I'm driving this afternoon. I will be at Studio B for the rest of the week. And I don't know how much I'm going to get to work on this between today and tomorrow, but we'll see. We shall see what we shall see. Let's see. Homo SR. Terrence, that should be an official. You got to make something like, get the some pride thing going on with Homo SR. That's awesome. All right. Well, I don't think we can end with anything better than that. So, folks, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. If you want to give some thumbs up and anything on your way out, that would be awesome. But if not, whatever. Anyhow, game on. I will talk to you later. Thanks, Magnus. I appreciate it. Bye, everybody.